Welcome back to the deep dive. When we think of, well, the founding father of the entire Impressionist movement, Claude Monet just springs to mind, doesn't he?
He really does.
You picture those dreamy scenes, maybe the hazy light on the Thames, or almost inevitably the water lilies at Giverny, that kind of tranquil beauty.
Iconic images.
But today we're aiming to go beyond those, almost serene pictures hanging on museum walls. We want to dig into the demanding, often quite tumultuous reality of the man who actually created them.
Yeah, we're looking at Oscar Claude Monet, born 1840, died 1926. And he wasn't just a painter, he was, in many ways, a revolutionary. His discipline, his sheer stubborn vision, really forced the art world to change its perspective.
Literally.
That's the plan, then.
Exactly. Our mission here is to move past that surface level appreciation, pretty pictures, and really understand the technical struggle, the financial chaos sometimes, and the personal tragedies that fueled this nearly century-long quest he was on. To capture those fleeting moments of light. That really is the core of it, isn't it? Monet was probably the most consistent, the most prolific practitioner of Impressionism's main idea. Expressing your perception of nature, mainly through plein air painting. Painting outdoors.
He was just relentlessly dedicated to that immediacy.
Yeah.
Capturing the moment.
And here's where the story gets, well, instantly ironic. The movement's name, Impressionism, which is globally recognized now.
It wasn't a compliment originally.
Not at all. It came from his 1872 painting, Impression, Sunrise Impression, Sol Levant. He showed it in 1874 at the very first Impressionist exhibition.
Right, and this critic, Louis Leroy, he saw the title and just seized on it. He used Impressionism basically as an insult, suggesting the painting was sloppy, unfinished even.
But Monet and his group,
They basically took this derogatory label and kind of wore it like a badge of honor. It fit their rebellious stance.
it really captures that spirit right from the get-go. And that rebelliousness, you can see it was kind of baked into him from a young age. He was born in Paris but grew up in Le Havre.
And his father was a pretty successful merchant. Wholesale goods, ship chandling, groceries. And he fully expected Claude to take over the family business. That was the plan.
Stability, the bourgeois path.
Exactly. But Monet, he had other plans. He was apparently a deeply apathetic student, hated schoolwork, really. But he did have this undeniable early talent for drawing.
And thankfully, his mother, who was a singer, she actually supported his artistic ambitions.
Which created this fundamental tension right there in the family. The expected stability of business versus the perceived chaos and freedom of being an artist.
So let's unpack those formative years. And because Monet didn't initially set out to be a serious landscape artist, did he?
No, not at all. Our sources show he was actually doing quite well in his early teens, like around 15, just making quick, witty caricatures, portraits of local people for money.
So he had a little business going.
Yeah, he had a local reputation for these sketches. But the real turning point, the moment let's say the future great landscape artist was born, that came around 1858. He met Eugene Boudin.
Boudin.
Key figure.
Absolutely key. Boudin introduced Monet to this, revolutionary idea at the time. Plein air painting. Painting outdoors. Directly from the subject. It sounds normal now, but back then.
It was radical. And it completely changed Monet's life, didn't it?
Totally. Monet later said, quite emphatically apparently, that he owed everything to Boudin, called him his master. And this wasn't just about, setting up an easel outside. It was about absorbing the philosophy.
Which was?
That the fleeting, changing effects of weather and light, that was a real subject. Not just the tree or the building, but the light on the tree.
Right. And that new passion drove him to Paris in 1859. He tried the usual routes first, though. Visited the official salon, tried to get into Thomas Couture's famous studio.
Yeah, but Couture actually refused him.
Yeah.
So he ended up enrolling in the Académie Suisse instead.
Yeah.
That's where he met Camille Pissarro, another future Impressionist giant. But the Académie Suisse wasn't quite right either.
Apparently not serious enough for him. So later, he studied at Charles Glaire's studio. And this is where he connects with three other huge names of the movement. Pierre-Auguste Renoir, Alfred Sisley, and Frédéric Bézille. Bézille became his closest friend.
Okay, so he's finding his circle, but Glaire's studio didn't last long either.
No, and this is crucial for understanding his early defiance. Monet left Glaire's studio pretty quickly because he just fundamentally disagreed with the way they taught. Glaire pushed for historical subjects, highly finished, perfected studio work, very classical.
And Monet was already hooked on Boudin's spontaneity.
Exactly. He was already searching for a way to express something new, immediate, rooted in modern life, not ancient history.
So he's barely started figuring this out, and then boom, 1861, age 20, He gets conscripted. 7 years in the army.
Right. And his father offered to buy him out, which was, a thing wealthy families could do. But there was a condition.
Let me guess. Give up art.
Give up art entirely. Join the family business. Monet refused. Flat out. He enlisted instead.
Wow. That's commitment. Where did he end up serving?
Algeria. Which turned out to be, well, difficult. He got typhoid fever, had to come back after only about a year. But his time in North Africa, short as it was, had this really powerful effect on him.
How so?
The light, the colors. He talked about the intensity, the vivid, saturated colors there. He later said that North Africa contained the gem of my future researches. It was a revelation.
You can almost see that thread leading to his later work, right? The Mediterranean paintings, the Venice series, that intensity of light he found there.
Definitely. It showed him possibilities beyond the grayer light of northern France. Anyway, his wealthy aunt eventually paid for his release from the army, and once he was out, he just threw himself back into painting.
Trying ambitious things early on, like Women in the Garden and that huge Le Déjeuner sur l'herbe.
Yes, the déjeuner, the luncheon on the grass, which he actually never finished, interestingly. But it's seen as maybe the most important painting of his early period. It shows him grappling with these big problems, like how to paint figures convincingly in natural outdoor light in a modern setting.
And he did get some early recognition at the official salon.
He did, yeah. He debuted successfully in 1865. They accepted his work again in 66 and 68. But after that, rejection, consistently.
So why the sudden shift? From acceptance to being seen as this radical outcast?
Because his work was just moving too fast, too far away from what the salon wanted. It was seen as too radical, too sketchy. The salon valued smooth finishes, historical themes, detail.
And Monet was all about pure visibility, quick brushstrokes, atmosphere.
Exactly. It was just discouraged at all official levels, as one source puts it. So by 1880, after one last failed attempt, he gave up on the salon completely. That rejection basically solidified his path outside the establishment.
And that rejection, it coincided with some really intense personal hardship, which kind of brings us to the birth of Impressionism as an organized movement. Around 1867, his father completely cut off his allowance.
Yeah, that was after Monet started his relationship with his model, Camille Doncieux, and she soon became pregnant with their first son, Jean.
So no money from Dad. How did they survive?
It was rough, really rough. Even though he clearly loved Camille and Jean, he painted so many tender portraits of them. Poverty was just a constant companion. They relied entirely on handouts, loans from friends, help from patrons like Louis-Joachim Gaudibert.
The sources paint a pretty grim picture sometimes, don't they?
Oh, yeah. Stories of not being able to pay a hotel bill in 1870, having to pawn things, constantly moving, facing eviction, utter desperation at times.
They finally got married in June 1870, but that was just as the Franco-Prussian War was breaking out.
Terrible timing. And to avoid being conscripted again, they immediately fled to London, self-imposed exile.
Which sounds awful, another upheaval. But that London exile, 1870 to 71, it actually turned out to be massively important for his career, didn't it?
Hugely important. Critically, this is where he met the art dealer Paul Durand-Ruel.
Ah, the legendary Durand-Ruel.
Very same. He became the champion, the main dealer for the Impressionists. He bought their work when basically everyone else, especially the critics, was just tearing it apart. That relationship provided a vital, if sometimes unsteady, financial lifeline for Monet and the others.
And London offered artistic inspiration too, right? He saw works by British masters like Turner and Constable.
Yes, he deeply admired them. From J.M.W. Turner, it was that incredible way he treated light, how it could almost dissolve forms, especially those paintings of fog on the Thames.
Right. Turner showed him how atmosphere itself, what Monet later called the envelope, could be the main subject.
Exactly. And from John Constable, it was that commitment to the immediacy, the spontaneity of landscape painting. Monet absorbed those lessons from the Brits and then, well, made them entirely his own.
But it wasn't all smooth sailing in London either. I found this fascinating detail in our sources. Apparently the police were watching him.
Watching him?
Really?
Really? Why?
Get this. 7 different police reports were written about Monet between June and October 1871. They suspected him of revolutionary activities.
No way. Just for painting landscapes.
It seems like it might have been wartime paranoia, you know? A foreign artist acting unconventionally, painting outdoors. Whatever the reason, it meant more trouble. And his work was also refused entry to the Royal Academy exhibition there.
So, rejected in Paris, rejected in London. He really couldn't get a break from the establishment.
It seems not.
Well, that kind of institutional rejection really cemented the need for them to create their own venue, their own revolution. So by 1874, Monet, Renoir, Pissarro, Cézanne, Degas, Berthe Morisot, others, they formed the Anonymous Society of Painters, Sculptors, and Engravers.
Monet was a driving force in organizing that, wasn't he?
Absolutely, a leading figure. And they specifically chose the name Anonymous to signal they weren't defining themselves by one style, but just setting themselves up against the judgmental salon system.
And yet history ended up defining them with a single style anyway, thanks to that impression, sunrise painting, and Leroy's sarcastic review.
Exactly. While the conservative critics latched onto the unfinished look, the more progressive critics immediately saw something important. They praised the group for capturing modern life, the fleeting moments, the true appearance of things.
And Monet quickly got a reputation within that group as the foremost landscape painter, right? Really dedicated to documenting the purely visible.
Yes, absolutely. And this dedication to the visible, to capturing transient effects, led him to tackle some really challenging modern subjects, like the Gare Saint-Lazare series from 1877.
A train station. Why paint a busy, noisy train station?
Because it was the absolute peak of modernity back then. All that noise, chaos, movement, and most importantly for Monet, it offered the perfect subject for capturing fleeting effects. Steam and smoke from the trains.
Ah, the ultimate ephemeral medium.
Precisely. He made about a dozen paintings of the station, chose 7 for the exhibition, and apparently coordinated them very carefully. He wanted to show the station at different times, capturing the arrival and departure of trains, showing how the steam and the natural light interacted, changing the color and form constantly.
So that desire to paint the same place multiple times, tracking the changes, that was the seed of his famous series method later on.
Absolutely. The absolute precursor. He was already thinking about how to paint time itself.
But his experiments, like focusing intensely on that train station, were happening against a backdrop of personal tragedy, unfortunately. Things took a turn in the mid-1870s. His wife, Camille.
Yeah, by 1876, Camille was seriously ill. She did give birth to their second son, Michel, in 1878, but her health just collapsed after that. She was diagnosed with uterine cancer.
And she died in 1879. He was devastated, wasn't he?
Profoundly. But the study he painted of her on her deathbed, it's one of the most complex, psychologically revealing things he ever did. It shows this intense duality in him.
Duality? How so?
The grieving husband, absolutely. But also the objective, almost detached observer. He confessed years later to his friend Georges Clemenceau, who later became Prime Minister of France.
Right.
He confessed that as he was looking at Camille's dead face, his first instinct, his automatic reflex, was to analyze the colors. He said he was just systematically noting the colors according to an automatic reflex.
Wow, that's a staggering thing to admit. Even in that moment of intense grief, the artist's eye, the need to analyze light and color, just took over.
It seems so. It shows how deeply ingrained that way of seeing was for him. It couldn't be switched off. Even then, the critic John Berger wrote about that painting, calling it a terrible blizzard of loss which will forever efface her features.
A blizzard of loss, that captures it. It really hints at the kind of intense, singular focus he brought to his art, maybe at the expense of everything else sometimes.
It certainly suggests that. And after Camille's death, things were incredibly difficult again. His main patron at the time, Ernest Hoschedé, went bankrupt. Monet was essentially destitute once more.
So what did he do?
He ended up moving to a town called Vétheuil, and he shared a house there with the now bankrupt Hoschedé family, Ernest, his wife Alice, and their children. Alice was already basically running the combined household.
A very complicated arrangement.
Extremely. And it evolved dramatically over time. After Ernest Hoschedé died some years later, Monet and Alice Hoschedé began a relationship. They eventually moved the entire blended family, Monet's 2 sons and Alice's 6 children, first to Poissy in 1881, and then crucially to Giverny in 1883.
And they eventually married.
Yes, in 1892, after Ernest had passed away. And interestingly, Alice's 3rd daughter, Suzanne, became a favorite model for Monet in some of his later figure paintings.
So with this new, large, blended family and eventually settling in Giverny, he finally found some domestic stability after all the chaos.
He did. And that stability seemed to trigger a fundamental shift in his working habits. He started really preferring to work alone, actively seeking solitude, getting away from crowded tourist spots where he'd painted earlier.
His letters from that time often mention needing isolation, right? Demanding absolute focus.
Yes, his letters to Alice are full of it. He needed to concentrate entirely on the work. And this push for solitude coincided perfectly with the end of his long financial struggles.
Ah, so things finally started looking up financially.
Definitely. His real prosperity began after a series of successful painting trips. And critically, when his work started selling really well in the American market, that made a huge difference.
Any particular trips that stand out from that period?
The trip to Bordighera on the Italian Riviera in 1884 is a key one. He spent almost 3 months there, produced around 38 paintings. He was just captivated by the light. He called it magic, described the region as a fairy tale country.
But the light there also presented a new kind of challenge for him, didn't it? Something about the vegetation.
Yes, exactly. The sheer abundance of growth, the luxuriant exotic plants. It was difficult for his impressionist technique. He wrote to Alice about it, saying things like, "These palm trees are exasperating, and also the motifs are extremely difficult to render. Everything is so lush."
So the specific forms, the complexity, it kind of resisted the broad, quick brush strokes he was used to.
Precisely. It was a real battle between his established method and this incredibly rich, detailed subject matter. He had to adapt.
And even though there were still some initial financial bumps, Durand-Ruel actually had his own financial crisis around then and had to pawn some of those Bordighera paintings.
Right, temporary setback.
But overall, by the end of the 1880s, Monet's financial worries were basically over, largely thanks to those American sales and growing critical acclaim.
And that financial security finally allowed him to create his own perfect, controlled painting environment. Which leads us straight to Giverny.
Right.
In 1890, Monet finally had enough money to buy the house and the property at Giverny that he'd been renting since 1883. And this place, it became his sanctuary, his primary, almost sole muse for the last 40 years of his life.
It provided the stability he needed for his most intense artistic experiments, didn't it?
Absolutely. And Giverny wasn't just a house with a nice garden. It was, in itself, a curated living work of art, designed by Monet specifically to be painted.
He really became the architect of his own landscape. I read he employed up to 7 gardeners at one point.
That's right. He meticulously planned every layout, every planting. He treated the garden like an extension of his studio, a controlled environment where he could manipulate color and light through the plantings themselves.
And he was particularly obsessed with the water garden.
Oh, completely. He expanded the existing pond, even diverted a local stream to feed it. And most famously, he imported water lilies, not just any water lilies.
He got specific types.
Yes, he cultivated the white ones native to France, but also brought in cultivars from South America and Egypt. This gave him this incredible range of colors, yellows, blues, whites that would age into pinks. It was all about creating the perfect palette in the pond itself.
That level of control is amazing, and it directly leads into his most famous innovation, the series method. You mentioned the Gare Saint-Lazare paintings hinted at it.
Exactly. The series method really grew out of his dissatisfaction with the limitations of standard Impressionism. The idea that one painting could capture one moment perfectly, he felt that wasn't enough.
Because the light changes so fast.
Precisely. The series was his answer to capturing not just a single moment, but the passage of time itself, the dynamism of light. He realized he needed multiple canvases showing the exact same scene, but under different light conditions, different weather, different seasons.
What did the public think when they first saw these? Imagine going to an exhibition and seeing, say, 20 paintings of haystacks or 20 paintings of the same cathedral facade.
Bewilderment, definitely for some, but also excitement. Take the Rouen Cathedral series, painted between 1892 and 94. He did 26 views in total. And his focus wasn't the building's architecture or its religious meaning.
It was the light on the building.
Purely the light, how it interacted with the stone surface at different times of day and different weather. When he exhibited 20 of these together in 1895, it was a radical statement. The message was clear. The real subject isn't the solid object, it's the ephemeral veil of atmosphere surrounding it, light and air.
And the sheer logistical effort involved. It's mind-boggling. The sources say he'd work on multiple canvases at once.
Yes, constantly switching between them as the light changed. He might have as many as 8 canvases on the go simultaneously. He'd work on one for maybe an hour. Then as the sun moved, he'd have to switch to the next one that matched the new light condition.
So 8 easels set up, probably 8 different palettes mixed. It required incredible discipline and timing.
Almost scientific precision. The series wasn't just about making pretty variations. It was a form of documentation, a study of optics and time. And he applied this method internationally, too. He went back to London several times.
Staying at the Savoy Hotel, right, for those famous London paintings.
Exactly. And he had that very specific view about London. He said he loved it only in winter. Why?
Because of the fog. He famously said, without the fog, London wouldn't be a beautiful city. It's the fog that gives it its magnificent breadth.
Such a perfect Monet quote. It goes right back to that idea of the envelope, the atmosphere being the key thing. So he produced that amazing London fog series between 1899 and 1904.
Dozens of paintings.
Yeah, 41 of Waterloo Bridge, 34 of Charing Cross Bridge, 19 of the Houses of Parliament, often painted from a room at St. Thomas's Hospital, which gave him this fantastic vantage point across the Thames.
And here's a crucial point. Those London paintings weren't entirely finished outdoors, were they?
No, that's right. Our sources are clear they were significantly retouched back in his studio at Giverny, sometimes years later, right up until 1904.
So that shows an evolution in his method, doesn't it?
Yeah.
He's using the initial outdoor impression, the plein air sketch, but then he's refining it, almost building upon it from memory and theory back in the studio. He's painting the idea of the fog, the refined envelope.
Exactly. It's a move towards a more conceptual approach, still rooted in observation, but increasingly reliant on his internal understanding of light and atmosphere.
And that series method, that focus on atmosphere, it really paved the way for the subject that would completely dominate the last 2 decades of his life. The water lilies. He started them around 1899.
Yes, and they just took over. It became his most ambitious sequence, as he called it. He ended up painting over 250 canvases of the water lily pond.
An incredible number. And when he first exhibited a large group of them, around 42 canvases in 1909.
The critics immediately saw something new was happening. They noted he'd reached the ultimate degree of abstraction. The focus had shifted completely. It wasn't about the pond in a landscape anymore.
It was about the surface of the water itself. Reflections, lilies, light.
Exactly. And a key part of that shift was eliminating the horizon line, getting rid of the banks of the pond in the painting. By the mid-1910s, he developed this incredibly fluid, almost immersive style. He started using different canvas shapes, too, more square formats, even circular ones, and working on huge mural-sized panels.
Why was getting rid of the pond's edge, the perimeter, such a big conceptual jump?
Because the edge, the bank, the horizon line, that's what anchors a painting in, verifiable, measurable reality. When you remove it, the painting becomes this field of color and light and texture. The pond stops being just a subject in a landscape. It becomes the starting point for an almost abstract art, as people described it.
He was painting light almost divorced from the thing it was illuminating.
Pretty much just the reflections, the surface, the interplay of light and water.
But this period of incredible artistic freedom, this push towards abstraction, it coincided with some profound personal losses and physical decline for Monet.
Sadly, yes. His second wife, Alice, died in 1911. Then his eldest son, Jean, died in 1914. And right around 1913, Monet began developing cataracts in both eyes.
Which must be just about the worst thing that can happen to a painter so obsessed with light and color.
Absolutely devastating. And the impact on his vision, and therefore his painting, was immediate and quite dramatic. You could see it in the canvases from that period.
How did it change?
His brushstrokes became much broader, less defined. Sharp lines started to disappear. And crucially, his perception of color shifted dramatically. He started seeing the world and painting it with this overwhelming reddish or yellowish tinge.
Why does that happen with cataracts?
Because the lens of the eye clouds over in yellows, it starts to filter out the blues and greens. So the artist, without realizing it, compensates by adding more reds and yellows to make the colors look right to their eye, even though it's distorted.
So his paintings became much warmer, sometimes almost garishly so.
Yes, the palettes became very heavy on reds, oranges, yellows. It's a known effect of cataracts on artists' vision.
It sounds like a complete nightmare for someone like Monet. How did he even continue working when he couldn't trust his own eyes?
Incredible discipline, basically, and reliance on memory and intellect. He knew intellectually what color something should be. He had to start labeling his paint tubes meticulously. He arranged his palette in a strict, consistent order so he knew where each color was by touch and position.
Wow.
But he admitted himself that he became insensitive to the finer shades of tonalities seen close up. He was, in a way, painting the idea of color, his memory of color, rather than the optical reality in front of him.
Did people try to get him to have surgery? His friend Clemenceau was pushing him, wasn't he?
Yes, Clemenceau strongly encouraged him for years, but Monet was terrified, extremely reluctant. He feared a botched operation would leave him blind or change his vision in ways he couldn't control. He actually said he'd rather give up painting entirely than risk losing a little of these things that I love.
But he eventually did have the surgery.
He finally gave in and had cataract surgery on one eye in 1923. But the recovery was really difficult. He struggled for a long time with cyanopsia.
Synopsia, what's that?
It's seeing everything with a blue tint. So after years of seeing yellowed, suddenly his world was overwhelmingly blue. Imagine going from one extreme distortion to another. It was incredibly disorienting.
That must have been just horrifying. I read he actually started destroying canvases from the period just before his surgery.
He did. Looking back at them with this slowly clearing vision, he felt they were terribly distorted by that red-yellow cataract cast. He couldn't stand them. The turning point, thankfully, came when he was fitted with special tinted glasses, Zeiss lenses.
Then they helped?
They corrected the cyanopsia. He apparently exclaimed that he was finally able to see the real colors again. By 1925, his vision had improved significantly, and this allowed him to go back to some of those canvases he hadn't destroyed.
And this is fascinating. He started retouching them, didn't he? Changing the colors.
Yes, this is a superb detail. He went back to those preoperative water lily paintings, the ones that looked too yellow-red to his newly corrected vision, and he started making them bluer. He was actively correcting the distortions caused by the disease, using his restored vision to impose what he now saw as the true blue tones.
That's incredible. Adjusting his past work based on his present sight.
It really shows his relentless drive for perceptual accuracy, even correcting his own past self. And amidst all this intense personal struggle with his vision, he was still deeply engaged with the world around him. During World War I, for instance.
His son Michel was serving in the war, right?
Yes. And during that time, Monet painted this powerful series of weeping willows. They were intended as a patriotic homage, a memorial to the French soldiers who had fallen. It highlights that even his very aesthetic choices, his subjects, were often deeply bound up in his sense of national identity and the events of his time.
So when we look at those final huge water lilies, the ones painted while his sight was failing, and then the ones he retouched after the surgery, they really serve a vital role in art history, don't they? They're seen as this crucial link.
Absolutely. A bridge, really. He's often called an intermediary between 19th century tradition, Impressionism, and the rise of 20th century abstract art.
What creates that link? Is it just the abstraction?
It's partly the abstraction, yes, the reduction of the subject to almost pure color and texture, but it's also the sheer scale of those late works. For many years, ironically, these late paintings were kind of ignored by critics, even after they were installed in the Musée de l'Orangerie in Paris in 1927, shortly after his death.
But they had a major comeback, a rediscovery in the 1950s.
They did, yes, specifically by the abstract expressionist painters in America. Artists like Ellsworth Kelly, Mark Rothko, Jackson Pollock. They looked at Monet's huge, immersive water lily panels.
The ones that surround you in the orangery.
Exactly. And they recognized an anticipation of their own concerns. The abandonment of traditional perspective and depth, the focus on the canvas as a field of action or sensation, the large scale meant to envelop the viewer. Monet, perhaps unintentionally, provided a vital historical precedent for modern abstraction.
And his public legacy today is obviously huge, and so much of it is tied to Giverny itself.
Definitely. His home, his studio, and crucially, the water lily pond he created, they were eventually bequeathed by his son Michel to the French Academy of Fine Arts. After extensive, meticulous restoration, the whole property opened to the public in 1980.
And you can visit today and see the gardens, the house, and also his personal collection of Japanese woodcut prints, right? Which were a big influence on him.
Yes, a huge influence. You can see it in his compositions, the flattened perspective, the decorative quality sometimes. That collection is still there at Giverny. And of course, the institutional pinnacle of his late work remains those huge curved water lily panels, permanently installed in the Musée de l'Orangerie, that took years of negotiation with the French government to make happen.
The sheer value of his work on the market today just underscores that cultural importance. His popularity exploded in the second half of the 20th century.
Oh, absolutely. His paintings command astronomical prices. For instance, Le Pont du Chemin de Fer Argenté sold for over $41 million back in 2008. And later that same year, one of the water lilies paintings went for over $80 million.
Just incredible sums. But that immense value also casts a light on a much darker history associated with his work, doesn't it? The issue of Nazi looting.
Yes, that's a crucial and often painful part of the legacy. Monet's works were highly desirable, and many were stolen or forcibly sold by Jewish collectors and dealers during the Nazi era.
The list of victims is harrowing. You mentioned René Gimpel, the Jewish art dealer who owned haystacks at Giverny and was killed in a concentration camp. And Paul Rosenberg, another major dealer, had a nymphaeus, water lily, stolen from him.
And these stories continue to surface even relatively recently. Remember the discovery of Cornelius Gurlitt's hidden trove of art in Munich a few years back?
Yes, that was astonishing.
Well, among the works found in Gerlet's suitcase was a Monet that had belonged to a Jewish retail magnate, confiscated by the Nazis. It just underscores how these beautiful objects can be tied up in this incredibly intense, high-stakes history of persecution and theft.
Thankfully, there are ongoing efforts to return these works. Our sources mention one case, Bord de Mer, which was bought by the Parlagi family in 1936, just before they had to flee Austria. It was finally restored to their granddaughters just this year, 2024.
That's good to hear. Restitution is incredibly important. It ensures we remember and appreciate the full context, the sometimes very fraught human stories behind these masterpieces. So if we try to sum up Monet's immense career, you really see this masterclass in artistic evolution, don't you? He starts as the rebellious plein air pioneer, battling the salon establishment.
Then he invents the definitive art series, pushing Impressionism to its logical conclusion, maybe beyond.
And finally, he becomes this, well, almost accidental abstractionist in his later years, driven partly by his own vision, but also profoundly shaped by the limitations of his failing sight.
He truly went far beyond the initial goals of Impressionism. We started by saying Impressionism was about recording perception, capturing the fleeting moment, but in those final, monumental water lilies, he seems to be after something else entirely.
I think so too.
Yeah.
It feels like he's trying to transcend just pure visibility, trying to paint only light and atmosphere, turning the objective physical world of the pond into this purely subjective, dazzling internal vision.
Which leaves us with a really powerful final thought for you, the listener, to consider. Monet's greatest, most abstract works, the ones that anticipate modern art, they coincided exactly with his physical decline, particularly his failing eyesight.
Right. He was forced to rely more and more on memory, on theory, on his internal concept of color, because his actual vision was so compromised.
So the question is, was that final leap into abstraction in the water lilies primarily a triumph of his artistic will, his vision pushing forward? Or was it perhaps a brilliant but ultimately necessary adaptation to the physical limitations imposed on him by his own body?
What happens artistically when a painter who dedicated his life to seeing the world accurately is forced, through failing sight, to start painting the idea of the pond rather than the verifiable reality of it?
That shift from observed reality to the painted idea, maybe that's the very essence of the transition to modern art that Monet embodies. Something to think about.
Definitely.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the life and work of Claude Monet.